We think the situation in our southern border today is a crisis. It's nothing compared to what happened down on the border back in 1915, 1916. Today, we only have unarmed, undocumented migrants coming across the border. Back in 1915 and 1916, there were armed gangs of Mexican bandits, guerrillas, and revolutionaries crossing the southern border. They were raiding the local border towns to get money, supplies, whatever they could. And just like today, the U.S. government protested but did little else. That is, until Pancho Villa came to town. Pancho Villa, also known as Francisco Villa, was born June 5, 1878, in San Juan del Rio, Durango, Mexico. Villa was orphaned very young. He had to go to work as a field laborer to take care of his younger sister. Being a poor field laborer, that didn't suit young Pancho. He gambled and drank and got into fights. To say he was hot-tempered would be putting it mildly. Villa started his outlaw career at a young age. Now, depending on the source you consult, there are two versions. The first version states Villa killed the owner of the estate he worked on. It was in revenge for the assault on his sister. He was forced to flee into the mountains where he spent his adolescence as a fugitive. Now, the other angle on the story came from Fred Bolt. He was a reporter working on the Tacoma Times. He had worked with Villa for about a year, writing about his exploits earlier. So, on March 13, 1916 edition for the Times, he wrote, "A young aristocrat kidnapped Villa's sister. Pancho went after them. On the way to get her back, he caught up with the priest, whom he compelled to accompany him. They came upon the man and the girl at evening. They were setting up camp. At the point of a revolver, Villa forced the priest to marry the runaway pair. He then made his sister a widow. The father of the murdered man had wealth and influence, so he put a price on Villa's head. Villa had no choice but head into the Sierra Madres mountains and turn outlaw." I don't know. I kind of like that second version. It sounds like a Michael Corleone style thing. You know, the Godfather movie? Michael Corleone kills his brother-in-law after he beats up his sister and sets up his older brother Sonny to be murdered. Well, anyways, let's get back to the story of Pancho Villa. Now, Villa would spend the next 10 years alternating between banditry, legitimate labors, and a stint in the Mexican Federal Army. He was captured by the Federales, and at some point, it was the custom to put outlaws into the Army. Now, for some reason, the Army was not to his liking, so he promptly deserted. Go figure. Okay, now it wasn't until 1910 that the legend of Pancho Villa, the outlaw, the Robin Hood bandit, the revolutionary hero, would begin to take shape. But to understand the rise of Pancho Villa, we have to go back to 1908 Mexico. Now, Mexico had been ruled for 26 consecutive years by the dictator Porfirio Diaz. He'd been characterized as a Republican monarch, and his regime was a blend of colonial-era methods and liberal Republican ideas. No matter what his rule was like, the peasants and the peons were still under the thumb of the landowning elite, the rich haciendados. Now, in 1908, Diaz announced that Mexico was ready for democracy and that he would step down to allow other candidates to compete for the presidency. But, as dictators have a tendency to do, Diaz changed his mind. He wasn't ready to give up power. But it was too late. Diaz had cast the dice, and the people were ready for a change. One idealistic young man named Francisco Madero, who came from a wealthy landowning family in the northern state of Chihuahua, was ready to challenge Diaz. Diaz thought he could control this election just as he had the previous 7. So the idea of being challenged by a young upstart, that didn't concern him. However, Madero ran a vigorous and effective campaign. When Diaz realized that his opponent was making headway and could possibly win the election, he acted as any dictator would do. He trumped up charges against Madero and threw him into jail. Now, Madero was able to escape and flee to San Antonio, Texas later, but he was still in jail on Election Day. So Election Day came, Diaz won by a landslide. Like no one saw that one coming. Anyways, on October 5th, 1910, Madero issued his letter from jail, known as the Plan de San Luis Potosi, with its main slogan being free suffrage and no re-election. It declared the Diaz presidency illegal and called for a revolt against him on November 20th, 1910. When it became obvious that the election had been fixed, one of Madero's supporters Toribio Ortega took up arms with a group of followers at the Chichilo Parado, Chihuahua, on November 10, 1910. Now, there was just one problem with Madero's plan. He didn't outline any major socio-economic reforms. And that didn't matter to the people. Just the idea of hope and change for the poor people of Mexico was enough for a popular uprising. You ever heard that before? The phrase, hope and change. Hope and change, hope and change. Oh, wait. Yeah, I know. All right, anyways, let's get back to Pancho Villa. Now, in the north of Mexico, Pancho Villa was convinced by one of Madero's supporters to take up arms for the revolution. Villa was being offered the chance of a lifetime. He could now legally steal the property of the rich haciendos. As long as he didn't get caught, he was a hero. Anyways, Madero's promise of land reform had attracted other revolutionaries throughout Mexico. These rebel leaders, such as Pascual Orozco, Ricardo Flores Magnon, Emiliano Zapata, and Carranza, along with Villa, won a series of battles against Diaz's forces. Now, these victories led to the May 21st, 1911 Treaty of Ciudad, Juarez. In exchange for his life, Diaz agreed to step down as president of Mexico, and he was allowed to exile himself to Paris, France. Madero was elected president of Mexico on November 11th, 1914, but his term was short-lived. Waiting in the wings was General Victoriano Huerta, who had staged a successful coup d'etat on February 18, 1913. Madero was forced to resign. 4 days later, Madero and his vice president were assassinated. The war of the factions began. Now, there was no love lost between Huerta and Villa. Huerta once ordered Villa's execution for allegedly stealing a horse. However, at that time, Madero intervened and ordered Huerta to imprison Villa. Now, Villa, being Villa, he escaped, made his way to El Paso, Texas, where he planned his return to Mexico. His opportunity came after Madero's assassination. Villa gathered a few men and supplies, crossed the border back into Mexico. He was determined to unseat Huerta. Now, Villa's small band of men quickly turned into thousands. For the next year, he and the other rebels would wage war against Huerta's regime. After the Federal Army was repeatedly defeated in battle by the Constitutionalist generals Alvaro Obregón and Pancho Villa, climaxing in the Battle of Zacatecas, Huerta realized the game was over. Having no support or army, plus pressure to step down from the United States, Huerta resigned the presidency on July 15, 1914. But things did not return to normal after the overthrow of Huerta. Seeing there was a power vacuum, Revolutionary General Venustiano Carranza grabbed power and declared himself president of Mexico. This didn't sit well with Villa and the other revolutionaries, so the revolution continued. This time, Villa would wage war against Carranza. With the leadership of the Mexican government in doubt, the U.S. government held off recognizing any group. Now, towards the end of 1915, the American government decided they were going to withdraw support for Villa and back Carranza's government. They believed Carranza was the best choice to bring stability to Mexico. When the United States chose to support Carranza, Villa felt betrayed. He was determined to overthrow Carranza by any means possible. Villa was going to wage war against Carranza's government with or without the help of the United States. Or was he? Some historians suggest Villa's plan was to get the United States to intervene, even if it meant coming after him. The theory put forward was armed American troops chasing Villa all over northern Mexico could cause a destabilization of Carranza's government. The Mexican army and the Mexican people would then rise up against Carranza and remove him from office. So, on January 10, 1916, some of Villa's men attacked a train near Santa Isabel, Chihuahua. There were 18 Americans on board that train. The Villistas killed all but one of the Americans. Now, Villa admitted to giving the order to attack the train for supplies and money. However, he did not authorize the killing of American citizens. Was this a planned attack and killing to get America to intervene in Mexico? Well, the papers relating to foreign relations stated Villa had, quote, publicly threatened all Americans with death and destruction of their property, close quotes. The U.S. State Department memo dated January 12, 1916, from the Secretary of State Lansing, described the killing. Quote, on January 10th, C.R. Watson, chairman of the Mine and Smelter Operators Association of Chihuahua, with 15 other of his associates, all representative Americans, while en route from Chihuahua to their mines, were taken off the train by bands operating under the direction of General Villa, stripped naked and deliberately shot and killed. This action had the desired effect on the American businesses in the Chihuahua district. Orders were quickly sent out telling their employees to get out of Mexico. This caused a loss of mining revenue to the Carranza government, as well as a loss of income to the American mining and lumber businesses in the district. Villa was playing for keeps. He was daring the United States government to intervene. The outrage created in America over the Santa Isabel massacre, as well as the inability of the Carranza government to stop Villa, is apparent in the telegram U.S. Secretary of State Lansing sent to Special Agent Silman in Mexico City. Quote, Washington, D.C., January 13, 1916, 5 p.m. You will read the following to General Carranza. The massacre of Americans near Santa Isabel has justly caused intense excitement throughout the country and is arousing severe criticism as to the ability of the de facto government of Mexico to perform its international obligations. Continuance of this attitude of public mind may create a grave crisis with far-reaching consequences. The only way that this excitement can be allayed is by prompt and vigorous efforts on the part of the Mexican military authorities to capture and punish the responsible parties. Impress upon General Carranza the vital importance of prompt action, as the situation is growing more and more critical every hour. Now, General Carranza can prevent the rapid spread of this sentiment by efficient action in this case, close quotes. Even though the Americans threatened to intervene in Mexico if Villa was not brought to justice, the Mexican government was unable to stop Villa's murderous rampage. The killing of 17 American citizens in Mexico, it angered the American people, but it wasn't enough for the government to intervene. The government did send U.S. troops to the border to guard local populations. As a matter of fact, during the previous 4 years, basically, of the Mexican Revolution, there had been numerous border incursions into the United States. This consisted of small bands of armed Mexicans, guerrillas, even some of the Mexican army, but they were driven off by groups of armed ranchers and cowboys. There were a few occasions where U.S. troops were involved. Now, one of the things that happened that's interesting, there was one instance near Brownville, Texas, where a group of American soldiers who were bathing in the Rio Grande River when they were set upon by Mexican soldiers. 2 of the U.S. servicemen were taken prisoner. The officer in charge of the Americans gave chase. They were armed. They crossed the border into Mexico to rescue their comrades. The officer in charge was later court-martialed. America was not ready to get involved in Mexico's internal problems. That is, until Pancho Villa decided to declare war on the United States of America, so to speak. The official after-action report made by Colonel Herbert Slocum, 13 U.S. Cavalry, stated, quote, March 9, 1916, at 4:25 a.m., 2,000 to 3,000, later that estimate was put to a number about 500, 1,500, Villistas attacked the small border town of Columbus, New Mexico. The raiders came in from the southwest, and as they passed by the Moore homestead, the couple came out to see what was happening. They heard all this noise. They were gunned down with a blast from a shotgun. This couple was the first of many civilians to die that day. The raiders poured into the streets of Columbus. They surrounded the customs house where customs agent Ricks and his family lived. His wife took their 2 babies and hid under the bed, hoping not to be discovered by the attackers. They managed to survive the attack. The El Paso Times, in an anniversary piece printed February 29, 2016, quoted First Lieutenant John P. Lucas's description of the beginning of the attack. Lucas's quarters were located on the southwestern side of town. He was awakened to the sound of horse hooves moving by his quarters, coming through his open window. He said, I looked out, and although the night was very dark, I saw a man wearing a black sombrero riding towards camp. Lucas reported, from the sound I heard, it seemed to me that there had been quite a few companions, that my house was completely surrounded. Now, springing into action, Lucas grabbed his pistol, pulled on his pants, but he forgot his boots. And at that same moment, though, Private Fred Griffin, guarding regimental headquarters a short distance from Lucas's quarters, had spotted the raiders. He called for them to halt. They shot him in the stomach. However, Griffin killed his assailants as well as 2 others. It was this commotion which drew the Mexican soldiers away from Lucas's house. Unfortunately, it was at the cost of Griffin's life. Griffin's actions alerted the rest of the troop in Camp Furlong that they were under attack. Lieutenant Lucas gathered up his men and set up his machine gun position by the railroad tracks along the southern edge of town. When Lieutenant James P. Castleman, commanding officer of F Troop, heard the shots that killed Private Griffith, he opened the door to his quarters and was confronted by a ballista pointing his weapon at him. Even though the raider was at point-blank range, he missed. Castleman was a better shot. He killed the raider. The Villistas were now fully engaged in sacking the town of Columbus and Camp Furlong. Homes, barracks, and the camp hospital were shot to pieces. In the few minutes of the opening attack of the raiders had killed 14 people. Now, the center of the carnage was the commercial hotel. 15-year-old Blanch Ritchie Dorsey recounted the nightmare of the Villista raid on her home. Blanch and her family heard the sounds of gunshots hitting their 2-story building, as well as the sounds of horses whinnying and shouting of "Via, via, via viva" in the streets. The front door of the hotel was kicked open. About 50 heavily armed ballistas came through the door. They immediately began searching the men and women, taking anything of value: money, watches, rings, lockets, anything they could grab. Then the Villistas took Blanche's mother and had her open all the rooms in the hotel. They went from room to room, shooting out mirrors, shooting up the beds, shooting up the walls. And when they were done with that act of destruction, the raiders took all the men outside and then shot them. One man, DeWitt Miller, tried to escape. He made a break for his car, but he was quickly gunned down. They found him slumped over his car. Once the raiders left the hotel, Blanche, her mother, and any of the other surviving women made their way out the back door of the hotel. Snipers were in the front, ready to pick them off. And they took refuge in a small adobe garage. Now, from that vantage point, they watched the hotel burn to the ground. What they didn't know was the raiders had put all the dead bodies into the hotel, including her father, to be burned along with the building. 2 miles east of Columbus was the ranch of Buck Chadmore. 11-year-old Mary Lee Gaskill, maiden name Chadmore, was awoken by the sounds of gunfire, which that wasn't unusual since they only lived a short distance from the border and often heard the sounds of battle coming from Palomas, Mexico. Well, her father, Deputy Sheriff Chadmore, suggested they go out and listen to the sounds of battle. Once outside, Chadmore could see that the town of Columbus was on fire. His parents lived in Columbus. As Mary Lee Gaskill recounted, her grandparents looked out their window and saw Villistas marching down the main street singing La Cucaracha, as other groups of soldiers began looting businesses and homes and shooting up the town. Now, the home across the street from Gaskill's grandparents was owned by the Page family. The Villistas tried to set fire to the Page home. Mr. Page was able to get his wife and children out of the house safely. Page then went back into the house and put out the fires. As soon as the invaders would set a fire and move away, Page would put it out. He was able to save his house that night, and himself, by the way. 15-year-old Isabel Petersen and her parents were awakened at 4:30 a.m. by the sounds of gunfire and the shouts of "Via, via, via, via." She said the sounds of bullets landing on the roof sounded like hail. Petersen's father was able to get his wife and Isabel out of the house. And about 100 yards away from the house, the family was able to take cover behind a mesquite bush. Those aren't that big. Anyways, the Villistas were shooting at him. Isabella recounts that some of the bullets passed between her and her mother's head. For whatever reason, the Villistas stopped shooting. Isabella thought it was because the raiders probably thought they had already killed him. Lieutenant Castleman gathered his troops and headed into town to protect the men, women, and children. When they arrived in town, the pre-dawn sky was lit by the fires of burning buildings. Castleman and his men could see people running through the streets, seeking safety from the fusillades of the Villistas bullets. He quickly deployed his men in front of the commercial hotel, which was engulfed by fire. With very little cover, Castleman and his men, heavily outnumbered, were able to drive the raiders westward towards Lieutenant Lucas's machine guns. Now, as the mounted Villistas crossed the field of fire, Lucas gave the order for his men to fire. Machine gun rounds and rifle rounds poured into the raiders. What was left of the raiders managed to take cover behind a small hill south of the town. Now, from that position, Villa and his raiders began their retreat. The raid lasted less than an hour, and Villa and his men retreated towards Mexico. The Villistas were not done with their murderous attack. As they were heading south, they stopped at the ranch of J.J. Moore, just long enough to kill him and wound his wife, who was later found in an adjacent field by U.S. troops. The fight wasn't over as far as the 13th Cavalry was concerned. Colonel Slocum ordered Major Tompkins to take 3 mounted troops and go after Villa. Tompkins and his men had a running gun battle with Villa and his men. They chased the raiders into Mexico, and at about 5 miles into Mexico territory, Villa and his men made a stand. They were able to stop Tompkins' pursuit. Tompkins was forced to disengage and return to Columbus without Villa. Now, the American casualties during the Battle of Columbus were a total of 13 killed in action and 1 wounded military. Civilian losses were 9 dead and numerous wounded. The ramifications of Villa's raid into the U.S. was swift. President Wilson ordered General John J. Petersen to take 10,000 men into northern Mexico and capture Villa. The expedition lasted 10 months, but it was unsuccessful. Villa knew that area. There was no way they were going to get him. Anyways, Villa's raid on Columbus accomplished one of his goals, the United States intervention in Mexico. However, it did not have the desired effect Villa wanted. Carranza's government did not fall. Villa would have to wait until 1920, when Carranza was assassinated, and he could request an amnesty from the interim president, De la Huerta. Now, De la Huerta granted Villa amnesty and gave him 25,000-acre hacienda in Canutillo. Villa's peaceful retirement did not last long. On July 20th, 1923, Villa was assassinated while visiting town to see one of his wives. The raid on Columbus was quickly overshadowed by events in Europe. The U.S. would enter the war against Germany 1 year later. Villa's raid on Columbus quickly faded into the background. It was the last time a foreign power invaded the United States. It's our history. It's our heritage. We can't forget. Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, if you did, click the like button and please subscribe to my channel. Feel free to leave a comment. Now, I do try to post new videos every 2 weeks. Thank you.